Hello and welcome. This channel created to explain some common features and dynamics of the narcissistic personality disorder and engagement or relationships between narcissistic and empathic individuals. There are many videos can be found on this subject, as these cases show rising tendencies. However, most of these videos somewhat rather unfair are one-sided in a sense, and imply self-victimization as consequence. Hence I target this dynamics from a different viewpoint, reflecting characteristics underpinned by the evolution of the ego system and the behavioral patterns of the individuals in general. All cases and experiences varies and unique on its own, as result of both parties' personal attributes and signatures on the psychological and emotional level. Also the corresponding emotional intelligence and cognitive functioning. Although I believe that support is important and very positive thing generally. But many by victimize themselves create more damage and problems for themselves, and with that build a completely distorted belief system as they are weak and need help in form of various therapies. Clinical psychologists identify some issues of the individuals such as self-love deficit, people-pleasing, or codependency, to name few, related to past and childhood problems in their early life cannot be argued. However, these problems based on false belief system development and chemical response upon them, just as consequentially neurologically implanted, still the cognitive functioning and psychological understanding based on being selective of very same environmental inputs of various forms, crucial to address that how someone can fix their own beliefs, especially reach mature thinking process regarding self-valuation and self-respect. The materials on this channel will focus on breaking down components of various subjects related to both type of individuals and the dynamics between them, and one-to-one correspondence between the triggers and the responses in the evolution of their interactions or the relationships from a viewpoint of an empath. All material here based on personal experience and intense study of the subjects due the influence of experience of such dynamics. Feel free to subscribe, share, or visit the future materials. Narcissist versus empath. Empath and narcissistic personality arise upon the exact same environmental inputs. The difference between them is the evolution of their adaptive functioning to this environment. In both cases, it's related to the relationship with the maternal figures and parenting in general. The family environment was turbulent and tendency for lack of stability. This partially generated by the child itself, by created conflicts as the way expressed its needs, and response upon the rejection of those needs. Also in other cases the parents' relationship was already chaotic in nature and the child has been dragged in or partially involved directly or indirectly. Environment with highly abusive tendency, addiction, domestic violence and distorted social norms. Controlling the child with blackmail and punishment, withholding goods, love, also attention, in order to reinforce parental superiority. Both empath and narcissistic characteristics developed from this very setup, however, the difference is that, both evolved to the exact opposite direction. This also one major underlying reason why these type of individuals magnet each other in relationship. This is because the very core experience is fundamentally identical, highly sensitive, and the sensitivity tuned not only to the environmental inputs on high degree, but easily map out personality and character signatures. This pulls them into relationship with each other due instantly tune on each other core. Regardless the identical background, they are still polar opposites in the very same time. As for the narcissistic characteristics to develop, the resistance against parental control had some potential window to succeed. By holding up against the parent demands long enough, also apply greater strength of pressure in form of rage and anger pushed to the extreme in relative short duration in time, in some cases self-harm or destruction to break the parent's ground, the child losing complete sense of reality, because experience the conflict entirely emotionally, which disable logical processing. Occasionally, parents show submission or simply shift focus from the child by abandonment. Hence the child was able to win over some cases directly or in a passive form, which undermined the development of reward system. On the long run, the child experienced constant control mostly passively and limitations. In addition, other environmental factors, such as involvement of competition of children in the family, also can be understood as constant survival scenario, which them imply deep-rooted envy and jealousy as consequence. Sometimes, the disorder remains under radar for long period of time, as either did not reach critical threshold early enough, only later on has been triggered upon highly abusive or stressful environment. One of the reasons why narcissistic personality underdeveloped in concern to empathy, is because of the self-critical system as part of core identity distorted or entirely missing, hence the foundation of healthy ego structure as well distorted in some degree. As for the empath, the parents applied long enough passive control and left the child in the state of abandonment or instability as the situation stood longer without resolution, and the left open the scenario for the child to deal with. This means the child had to drop its own need, and looking for the way to stabilize the relationship with the parents in order to close the conflict peacefully, and put stop on its own abandonment by admit the fact as their own need is just secondary. Psychologically, it is the base ground of dependency in any form, just as emotionally as financially, and emergent distortion in the value system corresponding to self-criticism. This fact apply to both, as to the empath and narcissistic personality types equally but in opposite tendency, as in case of narcissism it forces the urge for superiority by expressing pressure external while the empath internal, just as in case of empath result in low self-valuation and need of validation from external sources due the strong self-critical ego structure. Later on in the empath life, it can transform into very strong moral code which creates also superiority, but not the same way as in the narcissistic personality types. Early on, until the empath not experienced enough in terms of processing emotional distress and frustration, the empath learn not to act out, but turn everything inward instead, and find closure by themselves each time, and with that create footprints of continuous patterns of events with the same feelings attached to it, only differ by the intensity of those feelings. In both cases, this is very important consequence of why these characteristics formed at the first place, also the main reason why these groups eventually hypersensitive to environmental inputs, especially considering stress, and also how this relates to the ego structure of the individual, as it is determine the core identity neurologically. Genetics plays a role only partially, as the environmental inputs makes the most influence by trigger the entire process to evolve. Understand this. Due to the fact both groups as the empathic and narcissistic individuals develop the persona on the base of adaptation of survival, also upon the level and duration of the stress factors throughout the life, none of these groups change, or can be changed fundamentally. As for the common question, does the narcissist ever change, or able to change? The answer is no. In the same time also yes in some degree. This is because the adaptation is ongoing process, it links to continuous personal experience, and undermine the type of interaction and relationships with certain specific inputs. So they both will adapt uniquely to each person, circumstances and interaction, but on the most fundamental level won't change in the core. The reason why this is not a problem in case of the empath, because their very basic nature is not self-destructive, but it has opposite tendency, so the behavior is constantly validated socially, therefore they enjoy good reputation, which keeps that very fundamental core belief and characteristics to be justified and validated. Later on in the life, the empath experience less problems in the relationship due to the high level of compromising ability, and they do that by using the sensitivity to detect and solve relationship problems soon enough, or early on, to avoid conflict, stress and emotional pressure. This ability is response upon the survival instinct, but in its core is self-defense mechanism. Many times it does not serve them on the long run, but they have high level of understanding and sensitivity to measure the possible outcomes of situations which will result in negative consequences or outcome. Accordingly, in concern towards any form of relationships, empathic personality profile is more successful in order to adopt to survive, specifically in human environment, looking at social cooperation skills and functioning. Thanks for watching.